Hello and welcome to this webinar, What's New? Progress in Geography Key Stage 3, which is being presented by series editor David Gardner. This webinar is designed for anyone who already follows the Progress in Geography course and has been using the first edition. Before David begins, we just wanted to introduce the second edition resources that David will be talking about. Fully reviewed and updated, the new edition comprises one textbook covering the whole of Key Stage 3, 3 workbooks, one per year, and Boost digital resources, which contain everything that teachers need for planning, teaching, assessment, and homework. The series is also accompanied by skills and fieldwork books for extra depth and practice. Now over to David.
Welcome everybody to this session. You will have already seen this perhaps in the sample booklet, which identifies the key changes in Progress in Geography second edition. So obviously the obvious one being the increase in units, the new and up-to-date geographical data, the way in which we've tried to demonstrate progression more clearly for students, and the updates, the general updates from the first edition. What I'm going to do this afternoon is take you through those changes with suggestions in terms of their implication. What I'll also do is highlight things that have happened since the publication of the first edition. Firstly, in thinking about planning a geography curriculum, just as we'd completed the second edition of Progress in Geography, the Ofsted subject report, Getting Your Bearings, was published. And we were rather pleased to see just how much our second edition actually developed the things that Ofsted have identified as an issue in schools. And that will be a central core of what I present this afternoon. Also, the GA have published a number of documents since the publication of the first edition. So guidance on progression and assessment in geography, which I worked on with John Hopkin and the ASIG group, the Assessment and Examination Special Interest Group at the GA. A curriculum framework, geography curriculum framework. I wrote a book for the GA on planning a coherent 11 to 16 geography curriculum, a design toolkit. And Margaret, the most recent of those publications, Margaret Roberts, has published a second edition of her book of Geography Through Inquiry. And during this introduction to the second edition, I will be integrating the way in which those documents have influenced the work we've done on the second edition. And of course, the world has changed since the publication of the first edition of Progress in Geography. There's been ongoing war in Ukraine, COVID, decolonization. The world's population has reached 8 billion. India's population has overtaken China as the world's largest population. There's been a new census in the UK. There's been a whole series of extreme weather events. These Sustainable Development Goals have reached their halfway point before working towards 2030. So this edition of the book was an ideal opportunity to look at where those goals were at the halfway stage. IPCC have published a report on climate change, and there's been a couple of COPs since the last publication, as well as natural hazards like the Turkey-Syria earthquake and another eruption of a volcano in Guatemala. And also because geography, people are being significantly realizing that geography is an important subject in the curriculum in terms of what's happening in the world. There's been a whole series of books that have been published. And what we've tried to do in this second edition is integrate aspects of those books as geographical data. Okay, so overall, what's new then? First of all, we've now got what we think is a much clearer statement of curriculum intent. I'm trying to demonstrate a more coherent approach to disciplinary knowledge and thinking and working like a geographer. New units, over 50% of lessons are either new or significantly updated. There's a focus on key events that have happened since the first edition of Progress in Geography as part of that world update. New units that challenge a single story view. The impact of colonialism is progressed through the book. It's introduced in chapter 8 on development and then progressed in the regional units. Greater focus on the use of GIS, a wider range of activities including highlighted decision making and clear progression in approaches to inquiry, and new boost materials, the planning documents, the schemes of work and lesson plans and PowerPoints have been completely redeveloped, all embedding over 1,000 web links that are designed to enhance what's in the student book. We've got interactive animated resources from the book, an ebook, glossary activities, and digital homeworks and differentiated activity sheets, which I'll be demonstrating during the course of this introduction to the second edition. So let's have a look at the new units. 2 new units, Unit 5, so part of the Year 7 part of the course. Why do we need to understand how the Earth works? Which creates a theme, introduces the concept of the Earth system, and then integrates with units on rivers, coasts, volcanoes and earthquakes, and glaciation. Unit 17, the penultimate unit, are natural disasters natural? Is the inquiry question there. Then population and migration, which previously in the first edition were, as you know, were 1 unit, have now been split into 2. So there are 5 new lessons in Unit 9 and 5 new lessons in Unit 10. And then finally, the development chapter, which is the pivotal chapter of the whole course, has been completely redeveloped with 8 new lessons. So here's an overview of all the units, demonstrating where the new lessons are and lessons where there's been a major change. Obviously, there's a significant change in quite a few units and much less change. In fact, if you look at Unit 15, glaciation, no change at all in terms of that unit. Similarly with weather and climate. So in total, of the 180 lessons, 61 lessons are new and 31 have major updates. So we've had a question already, and we'll be, as Claire said, there'll be some questions at the end. So this is one question that we've had that's come into Hodder already. So I've already got the first edition of Progress in Geography. At what stage do I need to start using the second edition? Well, there's the notional split of Year 7, 8 and 9. On this previous slide, you'll notice that the first 6 units, other than Unit 5, have very little change at all. So you could use your existing Progress in Geographies with Year 7. Year 8, and that could be this year, certainly this year's Year 7, and current Year 6 coming into Year 7, they could use the existing first edition. But the majority of change occurs in the units for Year 8 and 9. Obviously, if you're using the first edition with Year 7, you won't have done why do we need to understand how the Earth works. But you could start, you could move that unit forward and start that as your next year's Year 7 goes into Year 8, and do that before you do why are rivers important. The other unit that you have some flexibility with is what is development, that new unit, totally redeveloped units, as you'll see shortly when I get to demonstrate some of the change there. That Year 8 could move further along with your Year 8s, perhaps swapping, doing volcanoes and earthquakes, or what happens where the land meets the sea before you do that. So there's still some flexibility within this, but you'll certainly need to do Unit 5, why do we need to understand the Earth works, how the Earth works, and Unit 8, what is development, in order to progress your students, because they're both key units, as you'll see shortly. So progress in geography embeds Ofsted's definition of curriculum. You may not have seen this one before. This is one that was in the Inspecting the Curriculum document, and really demonstrates that, as far as Ofsted are concerned, and I totally agree with this philosophy, intent, implementation and impact is a process, a series of interconnected steps in developing your curriculum. And I'm going to demonstrate how actually progress in geography has gone through those stages. It's been conceived, it's been taught, it's been experienced. And certainly as users of progress in geography, you've done the experience, and many of you have actually responded and provided feedback on your thoughts of progress in geography that we've embedded in an evaluation before we produce the second edition. So 3 interconnected steps. So where have we come from? This is a curriculum model that I've seen in schools that I included in my book, Planning a Coherent 11-16 Curriculum. There are some issues with the way in which we used to see curriculum design. We saw them as separate units of content. If we look at this, one of the issues here is climate change is done with year 7, but weather and climate's not done till year 9. So there's an attempt here to teach climate change without really embedding a concept of climate first. Africa is introduced as a region before development, before globalization, before population. So we didn't always think about progression in our curriculum model. We saw it as slabs of content that we taught to students. So we didn't think about how units were interconnected or planned for progression or sequenced. Bennett, in a very interesting article in 2005, had this to say about sequencing in the context of the curriculum. It's essentially the order in which content and activities are introduced and organized. So this has a sequence of some sort, but it's not a sequence. This plan is not a sequence that's been developed with progression in learning in mind or as an inevitable outcome for pupils. And this is because in the old version of the national curriculum, we had levels. It's levels which were separate from the curriculum where the progression was built in. Taking those levels away provides us with an opportunity to move forward. In my book for the GA, I suggested in the guidance section a model of curriculum design through 7 steps. And progress in geography has gone through those 7 steps. We started with a vision, which was a flap, as you know. We set clear goals for students. We designed a sequence curriculum, and then we tried to bring that vision to life in the 150 lessons that we planned in the first edition, where assessment, pedagogy, and curriculum work together. What we've been doing in the past 2 years is evaluating the impacts of progress in geography. We've had various groups of teachers and different organisations telling us what they thought of progress in geography, and we've taken on board the suggestions that were made by those various groups of people to move on, to create an evolved curriculum, which is what the second edition of Progress in Geography does. But like the first edition, it's built on guidance from the GA about establishing a progression framework. This is the 3rd iteration of this that was developed by, as I say, John Hopkin and myself, working with the ASIG group, the Assessment and Examination group of the GA. And we use this, and I'll demonstrate how we use this as we go through these next few slides. So this publication identifies some benchmark statements for 3 progression strands: world knowledge, understanding, and competence in geographical inquiry and skills. And we use in Progress in Geography the age-related expectations for a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old in those progression strands. So there are the progression strands. Those progression strands have developed from the aims of the national curriculum. So to develop contextual knowledge of locations of global significant places, to understand the processes and the key ideas and features of the world that are interdependent, and to develop pupils' skills in using geographical data and inquiry, which are exactly the same as the 3 progression strands in the GA's publication. Now, Ofsted, in their report, identified that schools where curriculum thinking was stronger, the leaders had considered the substantive content of the national curriculum and its aims. Schools that didn't use those aims, their curriculum was less clearly defined and often apparently less ambitious. So here's our revamped, redeveloped, based on thinking about and trying to make one, because one of the pieces of feedback that we had from schools was that the 3 progression strands that we had in the first edition were not as clearly defined as they might be. So we thought about that, and we've now produced these 2 pages. The first page is page 1 of the book. What are we trying to achieve? And that identifies what we mean by thinking like a geographer, working like a geographer, and knowing like a geographer. The vision flap in the book now splits up into those 3 progression strands and demonstrates the type of experiences that pupils will have as they work through the book in order to develop as a geographer. And as you know, in various activities in the book, we refer students back to that vision to identify what they think they've achieved in a particular unit. And these 3 progression strands, the aims of the national curriculum, actually interconnect with the aims and AOs of GCSE. So contextual world knowledge becomes know geographical material. Understanding becomes think like a geographer. Competence in inquiry and skills becomes study like a geographer. And the big step up at GCSE, applying geography. And those aims of GCSE morph into the 4 assessment objectives. So in following the national curriculum, in using the aims to develop the course, we're providing the building blocks in progress in geography for GCSE, but also A-level. Because we see the same sort of split, or similar sort of split, although knowledge and understanding are now merged together in a much greater focus on understanding. That's the big progression step up at A level, and understanding, knowledge, and skills and focus skills on independent inquiry in particular, and field work at A level. So there are clear building blocks running from progress in geography to GCSE and A level. These 3 progression strands permeate the topics, the 18 chapters, the 18 units of work. Those 3 progression strands: contextual world knowledge, geographical understanding, and competence in inquiry and skills, permeate each unit. So that's the focus. That's the focus of progress. Those 3 progression strands, and the schemes of work, lesson plans, and resources for each lesson have been carefully put together to demonstrate that progression for both yourselves and your students. So our starting point in the first edition, and again in the second edition, was thinking about this substantive knowledge and procedural knowledge that are the building blocks of the national curriculum, and building blocks for progression from the age 11 to 16 and beyond. And the first stage was to think about what would be a logical sequence for that content. And Ofsted, there is the sequence. There are the 18 units, and Ofsted make the point in their report that sequencing geographical context is complex. Of course it is, because the world's very complex. And when considering the curriculum as a progression model, it becomes easier to identify what progress students will make in that sequence and how it will be assessed. And there needs to be a clear progression map to support that. And in the first edition, hopefully you know, we had that progression map, which you could have got from Hodder as an A3, A2 sheet, where as well as an Excel spreadsheet, and we're currently working on another version of this for the second edition. Well, on the bottom are the age-related expectations for an 11-year-old. So you have four main columns there, one for world knowledge, one for understanding, one for skills, and the final one where the main assessment opportunities are in each unit. So along the top, as well as providing, there's the age-related expectation for a 14-year-old, developed from the GA's progression framework. So have extensive knowledge relating to a wide range of places, extended from local to global, including Russia, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. There's the understanding, and there are the skills. So having a copy of this gives you an overview of the progression for your students from the age of 11 to 14. So that progression framework and the vision flap provides a strategic global view of the course. It's a key stage plan providing the big picture, goes way beyond just a list like that one I showed you to start with, just a list of topics. This has done the hard work in terms of curriculum thinking, and the statements that are written in that progression framework clearly identify the things that are going to be assessed. So assessment and progression are at the heart of this curriculum model. And that's that progression framework is composed of a sequence of units of work. So each unit of work has a scheme of work that's available as a download from Boost. And each unit of work is a chunk of the vision. It's a stepping stone of progress. Each unit of work is assigned responsibilities for chunks of the vision. So, for example, Unit 2 on natural resources, in part, has the responsibility for introducing the concept of sustainability. Unit 8 introduces the concept of development, but also progresses that understanding of sustainability at a global scale by investigating where the UN are with sustainable development goals at this halfway point en route to 2030. And each plan, each unit plan is composed of a sequence of lessons. Each lesson has a responsibility for a chunk of the geographical learning. It provides a stepping stone in the learning journey that culminates in the reflection lesson, as you know, that brings learning together for that unit. Each lesson plan has an about the lesson section that tries to make clear which aspects of knowledge, understanding, and skills are being progressed in that lesson. So the vision and the progression framework provides the curriculum intent for this course. The lesson plans, unit plans, and student book and the activities that are on Boost are implemented to bring that vision to life. And we're trying to clearly signpost even more than we did in the first edition, where this is taking place. And the end of unit reviews, the online assessments and knowledge tests are working towards supporting impact on, or giving you the tools to identify the impact of each unit of work on your students in their learning journey to becoming a geographer. Now, in June 2021, Ofsted published a research review of geography, and it provided this very helpful diagram when thinking about curriculum, that schools need to identify both the content, the substantive knowledge, and those are the four main areas there that are identified horizontally, substantive knowledge, that are the areas of content in the national curriculum. So identifying the substantive knowledge to be taught and helping pupils to understand the connection between that content, that substantive knowledge, and the big ideas of the subject, the disciplinary knowledge, and how they work together. Now, that was echoed in the September 2023 subject report based on Ofsted inspecting and working with over 50 schools. Again, repeated that leaders need to identify both content, substantive knowledge to be taught, and the knowledge of relationships that enable people to understand how ideas are connected. And makes a very useful point there that pupils' combined appreciation of both substantive and disciplinary knowledge can be described as geographical understanding. And the main finding of the report identified that a lot of progress had been made in Key Stage 3, but there are some elements of thinking about curriculum design that need to be further developed. And one of those is disciplinary knowledge. So the report states that disciplinary knowledge is a weaker area of curriculum thinking. Teachers have yet, in many cases, to develop pupils' disciplinary knowledge. This area that we've identified in Progress in Geography, the thinking like a geographer, the concepts, the big ideas, the interconnected big ideas of the subject. So, for example, Unit 3 introduces the concept of the human process concept of economy. Unit 5 identifies the concept of the Earth systems. Unit 8, the human process content of development. And Unit 9, the human process concept of population. And Ofsted go on to state that these concepts are important. They actually name the GA's concepts in the curriculum framework as a good starting point. When teachers or leaders in schools discuss concepts, they were rarely in the form of key concepts or organizing concepts. So this is a key area for development in many schools that we've tried to build into this second edition of Progress in Geography. So it's modeling what it means to use concepts to help shape the curriculum. That just sort of confirms that process. So not a feature of curriculum planning in many schools, which means that it's very difficult for schools to articulate, identify the core knowledge that they want pupils to learn. And in schools where they were able to identify that core knowledge, usually because they had key questions at the heart of what you wanted pupils to answer. Here's the GA's curriculum framework. For me, the most important part of that framework. So this identifies the aims of the curriculum. It also identifies disciplinary knowledge as key concepts, and the core key concepts they identify are place, space, earth systems, and environment, and some organizing concepts, time, scale, diversity, interconnection, and interpretation. Second, practice, geographical practice, knowing how, so skills and the process of inquiry. Geographical application, knowing how to apply. And then the substantive knowledge. So that's a nice, neat, well-presented, helpful diagram, a tool to support you in that process. Now, we have to remember that this is a curriculum framework to A-level. So some elements of that are not quite appropriate at Key Stage 3. So I personally struggle with the environment as a concept, which is why that I've included concepts of human process, one of which is sustainability. The GA's model is part of that environment, but this is part of a journey towards A-level in terms of becoming a geographer. So to help with Key Stage 3 and share the big ideas of the subject, I've tried to simplify that. And there they are. There are those concepts. and I've got the interconnected highlighted. Maud, an Australian geographer who's just published a new book on thinking like a geographer, thinks that interconnection is, and I tend to agree with him, interconnections is a very important concept, because becoming a geographer, you make those connections, and that makes that transformational as a concept. Once you start to see that place, space, scale, Earth systems and human processes are all interconnected, I think that's, you view the subject and the world in a very different way. What I've included here, that I've introduced those units already, but on the right-hand side there, we've got examples of the experiences that pupils will have to become a geographer. Make use of their prior learning to move their geographical understanding, appreciate that human choices can have consequences, understand the complexity of issues and the links to economic, social, and environmental thinking. Place, obviously a very important concept, big idea in geography. Ofsted identify that as being poorly planned in the curriculum. Schools trying to cover too many places, or using a place or a case study to illustrate a particular issue, so earthquake in Nepal, so and nothing else about Nepal, not placing it in a continental context, not looking at other aspects of Nepal, so telling a single story of that place. That's a key issue that Ofsted identified. In Progress in Geography, as you know already, we have a unit on Russia, and then 2 continental studies and a study on the Middle East, to develop that, not only the concept of place, but students' world conceptual knowledge. And then the text there for pupils to become familiar with throughout the course, constantly reminding them of what it is to be a geographer and the learning journey that they're on, what they're actually progressing towards. And again, I've focused in there on the vision flap and the factors that are being identified. For me, the light bulb moments in developing this regional approach was this diagram in a chapter in Debates in Geography Education by Alex Standish, where he demonstrates the advantage of regional geography and why it's a key aspect of progression in Progress in Geography, and that you introduce a unit like population or development, that's systematic geography. And then within the regional studies, you see how that big idea of development or population or how the Earth works interrelates in a region. So the regional studies have a key role to play in developing understanding of interconnection, how the different learning, how the different concepts are interconnected, which is an important aspect of how you become a geographer. It's a key aspect of developing the understanding that you need in order to become a geographer. And when you map those out, so what I've done here is for all 18 units, I've mapped out where concepts are either introduced or progressed. You can see very clearly that units 1 to 7 have a role to introduce concepts. So unit 4 on weather and climate, unit 5 on how the Earth works. Earth system is the key concept that's introduced and developed. In unit 3 on economy, it's economy and place. But once you move into unit 6 on Russia, there are far more concepts that are being progressed. And as you move into year 8 and then into year 9, you can see that pretty much all the concepts, certainly in the last 3 units, 16, 17, and 18, students understanding of those concepts are really being brought to another level. And I try, when I'm doing training, working on training with schools and doing face-to-face days or going into schools and working with teachers, I say that I see your curriculum and the concepts in that curriculum as characters in a novel. So when an author writes a novel, they have these characters that are introduced. And as you read the book, in different chapters of the book, your understanding of those characters progresses as they interact with other people. And you can see concepts like that. You have units of work that introduce a concept, and then in future units, in different contexts, the students will get to know and understand those concepts much better as they look at how they interact in different places and operate at different scales and time. So I think that's a really important slide in understanding the role that concepts have, and we've embedded that in this second edition of Progress in Geography. Procedural knowledge, working like a geographer, again, has been identified as an issue in the Ofsted report, in that many of the schools that were inspected, these were rarely planned for. Progression in procedural knowledge was rarely planned for in the same way that substantive knowledge was planned for. And again, you'll know that this is a strength of Progress in Geography in the first edition as well, that every lesson's an inquiry. Every lesson, students are introduced to real data, and the range of data and the sort of data is progressed through the course. And what we've done in the Vision Flap in this second edition is have a collection of experiences from Progress in Geography that demonstrates that journey that they're on. So investigate different localities, including through field work, investigate and ask your own questions, expanding your geographical vocabulary to communicate understanding through discussion and writing, make sense of people and places by analysing a wide range of data. So the page 1, the introductory page, has this text explaining what working like a geographer is like, and the flap identifies the experiences they will have that will progress their understanding of how to work like a geographer. In particular, Ofsted identifies enquiry as an issue. In most schools, geographical enquiry was either ignored completely or mistaken for pupils asking research topics, asking pupils to conduct research topics for themselves. Margaret Roberts, in her new book, Geography Through Enquiry, which I haven't seen, I strongly recommend you have a look at, has 22 chapters that's demonstrating different aspects of enquiry with lots of ideas and activities. But in the preface to the book, she states that enquiry-based learning is not simply a succession of activities. She very strongly makes the point that it's about a classroom culture in which learning geography takes place. It's about a culture in which students are encouraged to be inquisitive and ask questions, where they examine geographical evidence critically and think and reason for themselves rather than simply remembering and reporting thinking of others. It's an interactive culture where students work together to consider different ideas and viewpoints. It's a culture in which students feel free to question what and how they're taught. If it's to be powerful, and have a transformational impact on students, then this whole process, enquiry, needs to be embedded throughout the course. And I strongly agree with that statement. And that statement, could be published at the front of Progress in Geography, because that's exactly what it is that we're trying to do with the book. So the infographic on the right there, we've totted up the range of different types of geographical data. And this is unfiltered geographical data. This is not a photograph with the answers written around the photograph. This is a photograph or a diagram or a map that is just provided for pupils to make sense of. And again, in this infographic, we've identified a statement from Ofsted: in schools where practice was strongest, pupils were given authentic geographical data and taught how to use it to answer geographical questions. Just taking different people's points of view, so quantitative data. There are 144 perspectives from real people around the world. There are 65 news articles. There are 6 quotes from books. There are 6 company leaflets. Those have been carefully researched and permission to use those resources provided by the various people. And we'll look at some examples of that shortly. And they're voices from people all over the world that we've incorporated in geographical data in the book. The back cover of the book demonstrates that inquiry approach to every lesson. Each lesson has an inquiry question. The final activity in the lesson is often pupils then, having worked through the geographical data, answering that question. The lesson is carefully laid out, the activities stepped to progress at a lesson level. Learning objectives are provided for pupils to consider the geographical data. Key terms are highlighted and expanded and explained, in the boost to boost geographical knowledge. The data is varied and rich and real, as I said already, unfiltered, and it's real people saying real things. And many lessons, particularly review lessons, have a box that identifies how this learning will be progressed in future lessons. So inquiry, I think, can be embedded at 3 scales. And I wrote about this on page 105 of my Planning a Coherent Curriculum book for the GA. So there's a strategic long-term plan that's, you can see the whole course, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment, the whole course as one large geographical inquiry, taking your students towards that vision, which is stated in that final lesson. Each unit of work, a chunk of the vision, can be approached as an inquiry. So each unit has an inquiry question. And in the review lesson to the unit, students are required to reflect on their learning across the unit and answer that unit inquiry question. Each lesson are stepping stones of geographical data that are planned as inquiries. Each lesson has an inquiry question. The plenary for each lesson provides an opportunity for pupils to answer the inquiry question. So here's the very first lesson of the course. It's not changed from the first edition. You'll be familiar with it. And straight up, it's asking that question: what is a geographer? The final lesson provides those first lesson learning objectives as outcomes that pupils can now do. They've learnt about being a geographer. They know how to ask questions. They know how to conduct inquiries and so on. And here they're introduced to the aims of GCSE as a stepping stone to GCSE. This is the second lesson. This is a new second lesson of the first unit. How do you work like a geographer? This introduces the inquiry process and identifies different sorts of data, quantitative and qualitative data, and includes one of the spreads, one of the lessons further on for pupils to identify the stages in the inquiry process, and includes a future box that identifies and explains that inquiry will be part of each lesson. And then you've got this article A. As I was writing this lesson, I saw this article in The Guardian, which I thought was very useful, that identifies that geography is being embraced by a new generation of students anxious to find out about the state of the planet. And with all those things that are happening that I introduced at the start, that have happened certainly since when first edition was written, that geographers are needed by employers. Employers will seek out geographers. So the very first lesson makes that point, that geography, understanding the world, really, really, really important. And in the lesson 18.9, so the final lesson of the course before looking at GCSE, the final activity in this lesson goes back to that news article. So right at the end of the course, that introduced firstly in lesson 1.2. The final lesson takes them back to that, and that's a big advantage of having a one book GCSE. The PowerPoint slides will include that article. The PowerPoint slides for lesson 18.9 includes that article in the PowerPoint presentation, takes them back to that resource that now, as geographers, what do they think about that statement? And the mind map activity here gets them to think about all the core concepts of that they've learned in geography and how it's influencing how the Earth works. This is Unit 5 scheme of work, and here's the about statement. The about statement identifying the Earth system, explaining what that will involve. We've tried to we have not tried, we have rewritten all the about the unit sections to make clear for teachers what this unit's about. One of the in particular, one of the bits of evaluation that I've had from teachers is how helpful these unit plans, which are on Boost, are in schools where a lot of Key Stage 3 is taught by non-specialists. And these about sections are very helpful in both the schemes of work and lesson plans in making clear to the teacher how each lesson, how each unit is providing a chunk of the vision that you're working towards. And you can see on the right-hand side there that those key aspects of learning have been identified in the scheme of work. Here's the lesson plan for the first lesson about the creator need to know and what that's trying to achieve. This lesson introduced the Earth as a system to pupils, identifying 4 interconnected spheres. And there is that first lesson, so that you'll be familiar with that diagram. It used to be in Unit 2 on natural resources. I didn't like the fact that we crammed in Earth systems a little bit and the Earth spheres into a unit on natural resources. So we've now got space to let that breathe and explain properly, and also introduce in more detail the Earth's geological timescales. We're also introducing the rock cycle in this unit. And that's explained here, and how the concepts of erosion, transportation, and deposition introduced, and weathering introduced here, and then progressed in the physical geography units 7, 11, 13, and 15. And there is that lesson that introduces the rock cycle and introduces key terminology that will be progressed throughout the rest of the book, which is identified for students in the future learning box. For me, the pivotal unit of the whole course is Unit 8 on what is development. And there are 8 brand new lessons in this unit that more clearly articulates progression in development, understanding of development, and the contested nature of the concept of development. And this is explained in the about section, that students will be introduced to a range of theoretical perspectives of development: modernization, the traditional model; exploitation, development as exploitation for more powerful countries to the detriment of other countries; human development; and sustainable development. And they'll be introduced to a range of ways in which they investigate that. The first lesson, what is development, is the about section here. So explaining that it's a creator need to know lesson, and also the ideas that are being introduced. So that's a good first point of call to look at the about section of the lesson plan. Here is that lesson. So there are the ideas that are being progressed and reviewed in the final lesson in that unit, where we also progress understanding of economic development and economy as a concept by introducing 2 models: linear economy and circular economy. Unit 17 on natural disasters introduces the ideas of Ian Kelman, and there's a quote there from Elan, and introduces natural disasters and introduce the idea, the concept and the idea of choice, human choice, and the vulnerabilities that might create. Lesson 3, which is in looking at Haiti earthquake of 2010, which is a key chapter in Elan's book, provides an opportunity as well to look at the fact that the disaster, the single story of that Caribbean country is that it's poor and can't cope with the disasters, but there's a historical story shown in the timeline about choices and decisions that were made by other countries have created that vulnerability for this country. So all those ideas about inquiry we published for the first edition, where Ellie Barker there, the curious geographer, conducted an interview with me to explain how inquiry works. You may not have seen that. That's still available on Hodder's YouTube channel. Okay, let's move along. So procedural knowledge. Now, procedural knowledge is also identified as an issue in the Ofsted report and in previous reports. So there's Leszek Ivashkov talking about the problems of map skills being poorly developed. You'll know this, I don't need to spend much time on this. You'll know that we've built in progression in the use of maps, and you'll have used the map flaps and our introductory chapter on what is a geographer. And here's an example of 3 examples of the Southampton map being used. Those 3 examples are still in the 2nd edition for you to use with your students, and a redeveloped lesson on Sperm Point, a more accessible and useful aerial photo, I think, links in with a map flap there, and that activity there on Helvellyn, which you'll be familiar with. GIS, rarely taught in schools. This is something we've tried to further develop, so it's pleasing to see Ofsted flagging that up. So we've got a new lesson on GIS that's part of Unit 3. This introduces GIS, and the About the lesson provides links to various places you and your department can become familiar with the opportunities of how you can develop GIS in your curriculum. So, for example, this lesson on a long profile, we've got a GIS in it. There's also a link in the book that takes you to the GIS. So you click on the source of the river and the long profile actually becomes provided. You can actually do this for any river in the UK. You can actually capture this for. This is a new lesson in the population about the UK census, and really excellent GIS provided on the Office for National Standards. And this lesson has an activity to take pupils there so they can select any of the areas of the UK and a series of GIS maps. Scroll down and see how the data for that area relates to the rest of the UK. So that's an activity you can do with your pupils there for your local area. And that's a really excellent resource that's been produced. There's also a very good one that we've used on showing population pyramids for different parts of the UK. Fieldwork. Obviously, with COVID, fieldwork has become increasingly more difficult, and at least Ofsted acknowledged that. We've got 3 fieldwork lessons again, which you'll be familiar with in Progress in Geography. And then we have 9, you might not be familiar with our Fieldwork in Geography book, where there are 9 ready-made fieldwork inquiries that you can use with your students. There's the 3 lessons that you're familiar with. Now, if we've got a statement in the vision of you will also progress your ability to write and speak like a geographer, communicating your ideas using a wide range of geographical terminology introduced in lessons and highlighted in the glossary. If we have that as part of our intent, then we need to do something with the glossary. So we've completely updated the glossary. We've got in the glossary the big ideas of the subject. We've identified those. The command words for various questions are part of working like a geographer. And then geographical words and terms have been developed. And then on Boost, we have flashcards for keywords, and for each unit of work, tables showing the key words. So briefly then on Boost, if I look at a lesson plan, so I've focused mainly on the about section, but you can see the whole lesson plan now is identifying the activity sheets, creates a need to know with links to various sites, activities matching particular learning objectives as part of the progression, and then a plenary that takes them to the inquiry question. The lesson presentations have been completely redeveloped. I really like the way these have been done. So this one is about sustainable development goals. And in the lesson, in the PowerPoint presentation now, we've got links to different websites, and we've also got the answers to the questions embedded in. That's taken a long time to come down. Let's go to the interactive. So here's a resource from a lesson on the impact of colonialism in Asia. So this is an activity where there are points for students to go on with activities to analyze the resource. So help them to unpick and analyze that particular resource. We've got a wide range of activities. So this is on gender equality, completely redeveloped range of activities. We've got knowledge tests and homeworks. Now we've got a few homeworks up at the moment, but we aim to get these up to date. So this one starts with a video clip.
Lesson, you were asked the questions, what is geography?
Takes them through, reminds them of what the lesson was about. And what I really like, a new feature, we've got animated maps and diagrams that unpick the diagram. So this one unpicks in the final unit, unpicks what's happening to the world's area, and animating it and explaining it helps students get their head around quite complex diagrams. So I strongly recommend you have a look at Boost, and we are committed to updating materials on Boost on a regular basis as one of the ways in which we keep the book fresh.
Thank you so much for your time. If you'd like more information about the series, please visit our website. The URL is on the screen now. If you'd like a quote, free trials, or if you have any questions, please email geography@hodder.co.uk with your school name and postcode, and we'll put you in touch with your local consultant. Thank you and goodbye.